I'm having a ballast in today's video. Yep, that was the one. Hey everyone, how's it going? I am back, and in today's how-to video, we're going to be detailing track, we're going to be painting it, and we're going to be ballasting it. We're going to be getting a lot done to make this layout really stand out. And so it's going to be a longer one, but hopefully you stick with me. And let's get started. All right, so painting and weathering track, ballasting it. This is one of my favorite parts of the hobby because it really levels up your layout pretty quickly. You know, you go from just some track being laid down on some plywood to something that's starting to look kind of realistic and kind of cool. And you can really start to sort of, transport yourself into the layout at this point in the build process. So I'm really excited to share this with you. We'll go over kind of the steps that I took to create the look that you see on this layout. And hopefully that gives you some ideas for your layout. Now, a couple of caveats. I am doing kind of like heavily weathered yard track on this. So, you may, if you're kind of doing, mainline operations, you might want to take some of these techniques and just kind of dial it back a little bit. Maybe not go as crazy as I do in mine to get a look that works great for you. So with that in mind, take what I'm showing you here and just apply it to your layout in a way that makes sense for you. Now, first thing I did before I touched anything on the layout itself was I just started playing around and testing some things out. So get a scrap of foam or plywood or whatever it might be, lay down some track and start painting it, start ballasting it, seeing what works for you. A lot of this technique that we're going to be taking a look at today is really kind of just getting to know the paints, getting to know the adhesives, getting to know the ballast itself, how it wants to work for you, how it wants to lay down. And it's much better to do it on a scrap piece like this than it is to do it on your layout itself, because you're going to start working with glue and that kind of thing. If it's not looking great and you've got glue down, it's harder to kind of go back and fix that later. So the first step I did before I started painting or anything was I added some detail to the track. The detail came in the form of joint bars, fish plates you might call it as well. I'm not going to go too deep into that because I do have videos about that. But I use Detail West as well as Kaiser Valley Models joint bars and use it across the entire layout. And it's a small layout, but it still required several hundred joint bars. It was a deal. Additionally, I used some turnout details from Microengineering. Their line of track has these little packets of turnout details that come along with them. I used the Microengineering turnouts on my main layout, so I had a bunch of these laying around. I decided to use them here instead of over there. If you got a friend who's using Microengineering, maybe ask him if he's got a bunch of these laying around he's not planning on using. After that detail was in place, I added some additional wood grain structure to the tops of my ties, just using an X-Acto knife and just kind of like running the blade along the tops of the ties, maybe notching out some of these ties here and there just to give some old worn out ties that needed to be replaced, give it that look. One thing I've noticed, especially with the Walthers Track brand of track and turnouts, is the wood grain structure that's molded into the ties is really rather shallow. So once you start adding paint on top of it, you lose a lot of that detail pretty quickly. So I felt it was necessary to kind of add some of that detail back in using an X-Acto knife. I have another video about that, so I'm going to link that video in the description below as well, so you can kind of see a little more in detail what I do with that. But once that detail is in place, joint bars, tie detail, and all that was ready to go, then I was ready to start painting. When it comes to painting your track, there's really two methods that I would recommend. You can use a traditional can of spray paint. This is Rust-Oleum Camouflage Flat Earth Brown. You can find this in Walmart. It's fairly cheap. And it does a really great job of coverage and adhering to the track as well, adhering to the rails specifically. The other technique is actually airbrush your paint onto your track and rails, and so I'm using Microlux's Railroad Tie Brown color. This is a little trickier. It doesn't like to stick as well to the rails as something like this does. So whereas you might need just 1 or 2 passes with this to kind of get the full coverage of your track work, this might take 3 or 4 passes to really get it looking great. And the more paint you apply to your track, the more that relief, the wood grain structure kind of starts to go away. So for me, this worked well. It just took longer. The one advantage you get over with something like this over something like this is if you have to go back and touch up like the sides of your rails later on, which you will need to do. It's much easier just to grab a little paintbrush and dip it in this bottle here and to get the exact color you want. Whereas something like this, you either have to mix up a color that looks very close, or you have to kind of decant some of the paint from this. It's a little trickier. There's trade-offs. This of course smells and will fill up your room with fumes if you're doing too much of it at a time, whereas this is a little more controlled. It's going to kind of be up to you what you want to use. I'm not going to say one technique is better than the other. I've used both. If this worked perfectly for me, I would just be using this. This has some trade-offs, but I think in the end, this works better for me. All right, that was a lot of talk, but we're now to the part where we're going to start painting and weathering this track. And for that, I am using oil paints. Now, I've used acrylic paints in the past, and I actually don't like them for weathering track work, mainly because once you get to the ballasting portion of it and you're laying down a lot of water and you're moving some stuff around, a lot of your weathering kind of just goes away at that point. It just kind of gets washed off, which is not great. But oil paints, because they're not water-based, they're oil-based, they're going to hold a lot better to your track. You're not going to have that problem. Oil can be a little tricky for a lot of people to use at first. It is kind of a different type of paint from acrylics. I think a lot of us are more familiar with acrylics and how those interact with your models. Oils, there's a little bit of mystery behind it, but it's really not that bad, and we're going to go over that today. Now, the set that I got to use is, I'm not even going to pronounce the name. There's a German brand. If you look up Oil Paints 502, you're going to find it. This set is called the Vehicle Weathering and Effects Set. It has a bunch of different browns and tans and blacks and stuff to use. And everything I'm going to be using in the set comes from there. Very nice paints, goes on well. The great thing about this particular brand is it dries a lot faster than, say, your traditional artist oil. So it is a little more expensive, but it is made for model makers. Just in that the dry time is like cut in half, essentially. Now, that being said, the biggest complaint people have about oil paints is the dry time. You're going to want to leave, for these paints in particular, about 15 hours between, 12 to 15 hours between layers. It is a slower technique, but it is one that I think gives the best results, especially for something like weathering track. The other thing I'm going to note is, I didn't know this when I started weathering the track, but this darker color here called engine grease dries with a bit of a sheen. It looks like engine grease. So the colors that I'm suggesting today are all pretty great, except for the black. I would maybe suggest getting another black, maybe from the same line of paints, or maybe from like an artist line of paints, just to get results that are a little more flat. Now, I am modeling like freshly after the rain look on my layout. So that shine, that sheen that I kind of get, it's subtle, but it actually works pretty good for me. For most of you, probably not. So although the rest of these colors are great, again, you might want to replace that black with something that's going to dry a little flatter. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and start painting this track. So what I've done is I've taken a palette here, and I've applied a little dab of each of the 4 colors on that palette. And I am taking some mineral spirits, and I'm just going to make a little puddle in each one of these little recesses here of the mineral spirits. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a nice wash with this to wash onto our ties. And everything we're going to be doing from here on out is just going to be nice thin washes. And we're going to take our time with this. And this is actually going to take us several days to achieve the final look. This is not a fast process. If you're working with a large layout and you're wanting to quickly kind of get this done, this may not be the process for you. However, I do feel that this gives a very good, realistic, deep, nice weathering look to it. And so therefore, I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to use it. So here we are, what, 10 minutes into this video, and we're just now getting to the point where we're going to start weathering. But all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the lightest color first and work our way to the darkest color. It's kind of easiest to work in that order with paints, especially oil paints for sure. And I'm going to go ahead and just going to take my brush and dip it in here, grab a little bit of the paint and a lot of it of the mineral spirits, and we're just going to kind of wash it across a tie. And I'm going to pick out just occasional ties. You'll see this kind of comes across as like being very white. Don't freak out about that, because we can kind of come back here. One of the great things about oils is they take a long time to dry. So we can kind of come back in here and play with it a little bit more. And I'm going to use this light gray, kind of, what's the color? Is it light mud? And I'm going to use it very sparingly, only on the occasional tie. Okay? And if I feel like I've added too much of a single color on, like say this right here, just grab more mineral spirits and just brush that on, and we can kind of tone that down a little bit. It might be a little hard to see in the camera, but that's toning down just a little bit. Don't worry too much at this point about getting it perfect. We are going to go over these ties several times over the course of this weathering process. Okay, and as you can see, I've added now this orangey brown color, and I've done so perhaps a bit more often than I did the lighter kind of beige color, but still very, very sparingly over the entirety of the track. These are going to be accent pieces of ties, right? Another thing I've done is I've tried to kind of group some of these colors together a little bit, just to keep it from looking too random and too evenly spaced. You know, it's a tricky thing trying to create a look that is truly random. Our eyes kind of want to pick out patterns, and so, you know, part of the fun here is just trying to make it look kind of random and interesting and unique without making it look too even or too unnatural. Anyway, so I'm done with that color now, so we're going to go ahead and rinse out our brush, and we're going to move on to the next color. And these next two colors, this kind of brown color here, and then this kind of darker, much darker brown color. These are going to be our two workhorses. These are the colors that are going to go over the majority of the rest of the ties. In fact, all of the rest of the ties. And we're going to use these colors as well to lessen the effects of the really kind of light gray and orange brown that we're getting here, and help to kind of unify all of the ties together. So once these accent ties here dry completely, and we are on our second or third coat, we're really just going to be focusing on these two colors of brown, this lighter color brown and this darker one. So let's go ahead and then add these colors now. We'll start with the lighter color because we're working light to dark. And I'm just going to kind of come in here and apply the wash on these ties, getting the majority of the rest of the ties with this light color brown. Leaving some ties here and there that we're going to kind of go back and hit with the darker color brown. All right, and then finally I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to start applying that darkest of brown colors. And this is a color that's
Gonna get hit by basically every tie. For whatever reason, this color does dry much slower than the other colors do as well. So you can see I'm going over these orange and brown ones that I've already done. You can see how it's changing the colors of those. Kind of darkening them up a little bit, but adding a little bit of it's adding a little bit of variety to that tie. It's making it look a little more interesting. Once that dries, that's going to look really great. You can see you can get some ties pretty dark and some a little bit lighter. And you're going to kind of just hit every tie with it. Every tie that's left over, and then a couple of them that have already been painted on. And taking these 4 colors and layering them on top of each other will help bring all those colors together into the same sort of family. None of these ties are going to stand out too much in photographs or in person, but when you get to looking at them, you're going to see, oh, this one's a little bit lighter than this one. That's kind of cool. This one's got a little bit of white in it. That's kind of cool. This one's a little more brown. But it does take several applications to achieve that look. And so this is where putting on a layer, letting it dry for a day, coming back to it the next day, layering over top of it with some more light washes of the 2 darker brown colors, going over it a few more times till it looks just about right. You have yourself a decent weathering job.
Okay, it's been 24 hours and I've let this dry thoroughly at this point. We can see we got a nice flat finish on everything here. We still have a number of pretty orange boards, orange ties that we're seeing here, so we're going to work on that. We see some brown, we see some darker brown, but essentially what we're going to do at this point is we're going to take our 2 darker colors, again, the dark mud color as well as the engine grease color. And we'll be going back over this again, and we'll be using those colors to kind of unify the track a little bit. If it's a little too dark, we're going to use a lighter color brown to bring it up in value a little bit. If it's a little too brown or a little too bright, we're going to use the dark color to bring it down. And so this step is really just kind of smoothing out some of the color and the contrast a little bit so that all these ties look like they blend in a lot better. We want the variation in color, but we just want it to be a little more subtle than what it's looking like right now. And so again, I've got my 2 darker colors here, and I'm going to add a little bit of mineral spirits to it. This is some I have left over from yesterday, so it's got a little bit of brown in it. And just as we did before, we're going to come in here and grab a little bit of paint, some mineral spirits, create a little bit of a wash on our brush, and come in here and just start painting these ties again to kind of unify the color a little bit across the board. All right, I've let this dry overnight and I can see now it's looking pretty good. Color variation is nice on it. I've still got some ties that are a little too bright, some outliers there. But overall, I think we're starting to come into the home stretch at this point as far as the color of these ties go. So what I'm actually going to do now at this point is I'm going to take our 2 darker brown colors here, and we're going to mix these together into one sort of super color, if you will, and then add the mineral spirits into here to create our wash, and then we're going to go over everything 1 or 2 more times with that light wash in order to just bring everything into alignment a little bit more, bring the colors kind of together a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and mix these up, and then we will add in the mineral spirits, and we will get going. All right, now it's time to ballast. So for ballasting, again, take a look at your prototype, see what colors they use, and try to replicate that. You know, a lot of the pictures of the yard tracks for the B&O Railroad in New Jersey use a really kind of a dark, almost black ballast. A lot of the other tracks around Manhattan also use that same color. So I decided that's what I was going to end up doing. Kind of just taking some of those techniques, applying it to the yard here. I think it would end up looking really great, and it does. Now, a lot of manufacturers will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you and come up with colors that would work great for your prototype. Take a look at them, get it if you think it looks great, and again, test it out on a test piece to see if those colors are working well for you. If you need to kind of lighten them or darken them by adding some different colors to that, you can certainly do that as well. In my case, I'm using number 50 Dark Gray Ballast by Scenic Express. This is their N scale ballast, and it's almost a black. I didn't want that kind of uniform black look in my yard. I wanted it to look a little bit messier, a little bit lighter. So I mixed it with this Pennsylvania Gray N scale ballast, as well as a couple other. I use like a yard mix ballast as well in there, just to give it a few different colors and lighten it up and add a little more kind of visual interest for me on my layout. And then that mix I ended up putting in a jar, sticking my label on it so I know that, hey, this is the ballast I'm using for 26th Street Station. You also want to mix up a couple of different solutions to work for adhering your ballast to your track work. The first is what I call wet water. This is water plus a tiny bit of dish soap. And the dish soap is just going to help break the surface tension in that water. And it creates what a lot of people call wet water, which is water that just kind of soaks down into the ballast a lot easier. It doesn't sit on top of it. It doesn't have that surface tension that would, keep the water kind of sitting on top of the ballast. It's going to want to soak down into the ballast. That's what you want. Additionally, I have the water in this. This is a mister. You can get these at get them at a grocery store, get them at Walmart. It's not a traditional spray bottle. I don't know if you can see, but there's a very fine mist that shoots out. That mist is you're not gonna be firing water at your ballast, and it's gonna cause the ballast to scatter. It'll lay nicely over top of your ballast. You'll prevent that sort of effect of just the water kind of pushing ballast away from everything. Glue, there's different techniques for using glue. I have found what works best and what dries the cleanest and the clearest is a matte medium solution. In this case, I'm using 1 part matte medium to 3 parts water. And by the way, water, I'm using RO water, bottled water you get from the store instead of what comes out of my faucet. I got hard water, so it's got that white film. I don't want that on my layout, so I'm using nice clean water. But 1 part matte medium to 3 parts water. Mix that up really good in a spare bottle, and you have yourself a glue that holds really strong but goes on very smoothly and very well. It additionally helps to cut down on some of the sheen that oil paints tend to have for a long time after they are, while they're in the drying process. All right, so let's go ahead and get into ballasting. We will be ballasting this section right here. This is kind of a complicated piece of track work, but it has a little bit of everything in it, so I'll be able to show off, most of my techniques for you here today in this section. And ballasting track is very simple. It just takes a little bit of time. I think a little bit of patience. You don't want to rush it, and you want to do it right because now we're starting to apply glue to the layout here, and things start to become semi-permanent at this point. So we have our ballast that we've mixed up from a couple of different colors here. I keep them in a jar ready to go. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to start just scooping out some of this with a spoon and then laying it down in between the rails. Just kind of get a thin line in between these rails. Now, some people might say use a funnel, and that's fine. If it works for you to use a funnel, go for it. I have not had luck with the funnel technique. Putting a funnel in place here and running some ballast through the funnel in between the ties. It always kind of ends up looking sort of like this anyway. So the spoon gives me some good control. Once I've got the ballast spooned out onto the track, I can come in here with a brush and I can just start brushing along here and pushing this ballast down in between those ties. And at this point, I am looking to not only get it in between the ties, but also make sure that it's staying off of the inside of the rails. A lot of times ballast will want to get in that webbing in between your rails, and it can be a little tricky to get out, and not something you maybe would notice necessarily as you are laying down your ballast. Another thing I'm doing is, as I'm spreading this out, I'm making sure it gets in between all the ties. And I want it to be basically level with the tops of your ties. Maybe have your ties poking out a little bit. We don't want too little ballast here at this point. Otherwise your ties stick out quite a bit and it kind of looks unrealistic. And if you have too much ballast and it's all over top of your ties, then you don't see your ties, which can be fine. There are situations where your ties are kind of buried completely within the ballast. I'm going to add another line kind of on the outside of the ties now at this point. And then with my brush kind of work that into place. So there are situations where having the ballast kind of piling up over top of the ties does make sense. You'll see that a lot in yards. You don't see it so much on nicely manicured main lines, but secondary track, yard track, you'll see that kind of thing. Where everything kind of starts sinking down into the ballast. Or there might have been a quick ballast repair job done and they didn't comb it out nicely. So like maybe right in here, this ballast goes on a little thicker and it goes up over top of the ties like that. You want to make sure you don't do it so much on the inside of your webbing. That's where your flanges of your cars are and you don't want to interrupt those. You want to make sure that that stays out from inside your frog as well. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that ballast kind of piled up right there, but I'm going to make sure everything around it is nicely brushed out. A lot of people get nervous working around turnouts, you know, your switch points and stuff. Don't worry about it so much. I'll show you once we start laying down glue how to handle that. You still want these turnout points to look good, so you still want to have some ballast around there. But if you're careful with how you glue them, it won't be an issue. Okay, just kind of continue to work it. Look at those areas where I could use a little more ballast. Sprinkle in a little bit more of that ballast in those areas there. And this, just take your time. Just take your time. Don't rush this part. Alright, so once I have taken some time here and I've gone through here and I've brushed all my ballast out and it's all looking pretty darn great, I'm happy with that. Now we can go ahead and come back in here and secure this ballast down. So we will be taking our wet water. Again, this is water plus just a hint of dish soap to kind of wet it down a little bit inside my mister. And I'm going to be just misting my entire... Oh my gosh, my mister broke in the middle of me doing this, so I had to run to Walmart and get a new one. Slightly different type, but it should work the same. Let's go ahead and we're just going to mist this water on here. And it comes out with a lot more force than I'd like, but it doesn't seem to be moving things around too much. Okay, cool. With N-scale ballast, it tends to move around a little bit more when it, with water and stuff, because it is such a fine granule, but this looks like it's doing a pretty good job. So this is all wetted down and ready to go. So next thing we're going to do is add our glue. So you're going to shake up your bottle of 1 part matte medium, 3 parts water. Get that really nice and mixed up for you. And then I use this little pipette. You can get them on Amazon. They come like $100 for, or 100 pipettes for like under $10. So they're nice and disposable. And we're just going to start dribbling it into these wetted down sections. Kind of aim for between the rails. But if you get it on top of the, if you get on top of the ties, you're fine. Again, hold your pipette close to the track as well, so you're not dropping down drops of water from a great distance and disturbing your ballast that way. And you just kind of soak it in there good. Now when you get around the turnout points, just kind of be careful. Don't get the glue inside.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Don't get the glue kind of inside your turnout, but you're okay to kind of get it around there. And don't worry too much about, you know, gluing your track in place. What you're going to do is just you're going to come through here a few times as this glue is drying, and you're going to wiggle your turnout points and just make sure that they stay nice and snappy, and you'll be fine. So we're going to go ahead and let this dry for about 10 minutes. We're going to come back and take a look at it. Okay, we've let this dry for about 10 minutes, and we're going to go back here, and I'm just going to take my fingers, I'm going to go in between these rails here, and I'm just going to kind of press them on the rails, and we can see what I'm doing is I'm picking up a lot of ballast. This is ballast that was kind of sitting mostly on top of the rails, and was a little bit harder when it was dry to pick up, but now that it's wet, it's a little bit sticky. I am able to kind of come back in here and just kind of run my finger along here and just pick that up off of the top of the rails there. So I'm just going to do this a little bit. Don't worry about getting it perfectly clean on the tops of the rails, you know. In real life, some ballast does still end up on top of those rails, but in model form, you know, there's this fine line between something looking messy but realistic and something looking like it was just haphazardly done in model form, right? It's something we're always kind of fighting as modelers. And I find that better, cleaner, nicer ballast ends up looking better in the long run. So I'm also going to come in here, I'm going to play with my switch points. Just make sure these things are still clicking and feeling good, and they are. I'm going to let this dry a little longer, come back in and do the same thing. Just kind of like see if there's any more ballast to get off the tops of those rails. Make sure these switch points are behaving nicely, doing what they're supposed to do. And this will take a few hours to dry fully. But it'll dry to a point where you can kind of touch it and handle it and move on to the next section fairly quickly. But you want to give it a few hours before you call this nice and dry and done. Okay, here we are 24 hours later, and the ballast is dry. Not 100% dry. It's still got a little bit of drying left to do on it, but it's not coming off anymore. With my fingers, it's looking pretty good. It's starting to turn the color that its final color is going to be. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to play with my switch points a little bit, just make sure everything is looking okay. And I can see here, if your switch points don't, you know, but flush up against your other rail. Generally what's happened is there's a little piece of ballast that's kind of gotten in between the rails or sitting on top of the ties down in there. So go ahead and just scrape along. You can see now it's sitting nice and flush and looking absolutely perfect there. And then I'm just going to come along here and just with my toothpick kind of just scrape ballast off of areas where I don't really want it to be. And now's a good time to do all that. And just take your time, kind of take a look at things. Make sure it's all looking good. Make sure it's looking nice and clean. Again, with ballasting, you know, there's a line there. If it's too dirty, it looks haphazardly applied, and it's in my opinion a little bit better just to be a little bit cleaner with your ballasting, and then maybe let some like weathering powders or something kind of dirty things up a little bit more. But that's pretty good to me, so we're going to go ahead and call that good, and then I can then begin moving on to another section. Well, that's it for this video, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. It has been a long one. It's been it's been quite the adventure getting this track work detailed and weathered and painted and ballasted. But the results are great. I'm really happy with how this is turning out. I hope these techniques work for you. Again, you don't have to do them exactly like how I'm doing them. You know, your situation may be a little different than mine, but hopefully this kind of gives you a place to start. Thank you everyone for stopping by. I appreciate it. If you liked this video, leave me a like, share it with somebody else who's just starting their layout, you know, whatever it might be. And I'll see everyone in another video.